personal biases, which is important because when even the people who translated the Bible did that with their own biases. And so you need to understand where I'm coming from and where my background is. I grew up in the Presbyterian church. I was a Presbyterian up until I came down here to Masonboro. And a lot of you understand the reason I'm here at Masonboro. And also right now I split town between Masonboro and Harvard United Methodist for a very good reason. But my background is Presbyterian. I attended NC State University. I am a software support analyst and engineer. And when I study the Bible, and especially for this subject, I did that from more or less looking at it from a technical standpoint and from an analytical standpoint. And secondly, and most importantly, one of the ground rules I have for myself, and I would ask everybody else in this class, is to be non-judgmental. And I look upon this from a non-judgmental, objective standpoint. And so that being said, the way that I've approached this is that the outline that I'm going to be following for the next 4 Sundays, but today included, is we're going to start out with the definitions of what exactly cohabitation is that we're talking about. Secondly, we're going to look at it from the the subject of cohabitation from the historical context and how certain definitions have changed through history. And then we're going to start out with the ancient. Today we're going to talk about from the ancient Hebrew and the Mosaic period. And then we're going to go through the New Testament period, which encompasses essentially the Jewish and the Roman perspective, because those two cultures were very intertwined in Israel and the Holy Land at that particular time. And then we're going to go and look at how it evolved through the concept of cohabitation evolved through the Middle Ages. And then finally we're going to wrap up with modern trends and where we are. Yes, sir?
Are you going to use PowerPoint presentations throughout your class? Can you open it up so we can see it?
Make it larger.
Just go into projection mode. You okay with doing that?
Let's see if I can.
It's the little screen image down the page line, brown line, bottom, all the way over to the right.
All the way over to the right.
Yeah. There you
Is that better?
Yeah, that's what thank you.
What you might do more, pull that table out a little bit and make it more.
Oh, you can, oh. Yeah. How's that? Is that better?
That's for the benefit of us seniors on the back row.
Then they're back there. Okay. So, first off, when we talk about cohabitation, we're talking about the general definition definitions that I wanted to start out with. It was start with 2 main areas. First being the state-sanctioned mode of cohabitation, otherwise known as marriage. And then there's the other topic, non-state sanctioned cohabitation, which essentially are 2 people living together without the benefits of the privilege of marriage. And of course, under each of those 2 headings, we talk about conjugal and non-conjugal cohabitation. And there are those situations where couples are either get married or live together for non-conjugal reasons, and primarily out of for economic or companionship reasons. Now, to go into the historical context, and by the way, it's very difficult to separate those two, especially in the ancient Hebrew and Mosaic periods, because the concept of marriage and essentially cohabitation was very, very blurred. There was not a distinct, a real distinct separation of the two. Excuse me. By the way, if anybody has questions or want to make comments, please go ahead. Now, to go and look at the ancient Hebrew culture, and this is from the Abraham. I'm starting out with Abraham because he is the patriarch of our Judeo-Christian and as well as Muslim heritage. They were essentially a patriarchal society. They were nomadics. They were nomads. They lived in tents. They were herders and gatherers. They didn't really have agriculture in the Hebrew society had not developed at that point as yet. And it's important to understand the context, the historical context here as far as relationships are concerned, especially man-woman relationships. And then after the Hebrew became cultivators after they left Egypt. When Moses led them out of Egypt, because that's where they learned about cultivation, and also because and of course they went to Egypt because of the famine and when Joseph was there. By the way, not many people realize it or not, but the Hebrew were in Egypt twice. Once with Abraham, because Abraham went to Egypt, and of course when Jacob sent his sons to Egypt, and for both reasons it was because of famine. And of course Egypt having the agriculture that they had, they did have stores of grain. And then the interesting thing about the Hebrew was they spoke a lot in metaphors. Their language was a lot of metaphors, and that's how the Old Testament is written. A lot of that is metaphorically presented. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Larry.
What do I know about it?
Anyway. And you guys had better not let me go through this too fast, because the only thing I'm ready to talk about today is ancient Hebrew. Okay, as far as the family and household structure, you had at the top the patriarch. Ruled that household, had life and death control over that household. And then beneath the patriarch, you had the sons. And after the sons, you essentially had the property. And the wives, and this is from what I have been able to gather, and the research I did on this came from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and also I did some other readings on ancient Hebrew culture on this, and ancient Hebrew relationships. And the wives were essentially property. And beneath the wives you had the children, and then you had the daughters, servants, and the slaves. Now the wives were essentially did have a status above the slaves and servants. And of course, the wives did control the children for the most part.
Mark,
But, yes, ma'am.
when you say wives, you're saying plural, right? That the head of the household had more than one or not?
And that was possible because polygamy was a common practice during that period. In fact, it was pretty much the, especially with the wealthier ones, the ones who had the bigger flocks, it was not uncommon for them to have multiple wives. And there was a good reason for that, for polygamy, because men were out either fighting battles or had accidents hunting, that sort of thing. And of course, men, as a general rule, have a shorter lifespan than women.
And that brings up my question.
Yes, ma'am.
What if the wife didn't have any adult male children and the husband died?
Well, that is
Who owned the property then?
That is an excellent question. It would be the closest male relative to the husband, whether it be his brother, uncle, or nephew.
There is one example in the Bible, I can't remember just where it is, where the older girls got together and said, okay, we don't have brothers, we don't have, so that we should inherit the property, and they did allow it for them. I can't remember.
That was rare. Now, if you want a great example of this, go look at the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth has just lays it out perfectly. In fact, it's spelled out pretty much in Deuteronomy. It is as far as the marriage law. If you want to look at Deuteronomy 22 verses 13 through 30, it sort of outlines that, you know. And of course, you're talking about the Ten Commandments and the Mosaic Law, including the Ten Commandments, the Pentateuch, and Numbers here, the purity of the camp and jealousy. That's kind of disturbing. And in Deuteronomy, when they're talking about marrying captive women and how what they call marriage, essentially, in that case, is the men taking the women to their household and wedding them, if you will. And of course, in the biblical sense, wedding was having a conjugal relationship.
Consensual?
Pardon? That's essentially the problem.
No, I mean consensual. You make it sound like he just clubbed her over the head and drug her to the cage.
Well, in the case of when they say married captive women, these are women that Israelites had gone out, they conquered the armies, and they'd taken women hostages and that sort of thing.
So it was rape is what it was.
Well, that's interesting because when you say rape, if a man raped a woman who was not betrothed or not another man's wife, he was obligated to A, pay the bride price to her father, and then he had to marry her and he could not divorce her. That's the Mosaic law.
Did she have a say in the matter? Or?
Not at all.
Okay, all right.
Not at all. In fact, if you look at how marriages were done in the ancient Hebrew time, essentially it was a transaction between the father of the groom and the father of the bride, and they worked out the financial dealings there. I mean, they worked out the bride price and everything.
When they like Jacob when he went to see Rachel and Leah. And
Exactly. I mean,
well, he
and-
worked it out, but
or better was when Boaz went in front of the village elders and said, hey, look,
Mm-hmm.
I'm buying
They didn't have any.
this, her, well, you have to look at the book of Ruth. I'm thinking for a second. But essentially, Boaz was a member of her dead husband's family.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a closer member of that family, and so Boaz had to go and negotiate with him.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what he did was he bought that man's property, including Ruth, from him. In fact, hang on. If you look at Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, if somebody's got a Bible and can read that, that would kind of put a light on it.
Meanwhile, Boaz went to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer, he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here, and they did so. Then he said to the kinsman's redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belongs to our brother, what do we call it? Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it, he said. Then Boaz said, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth, the Moabitess, you acquired the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself, I cannot do it. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself. And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elder and all the other people, today you are witness that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witness. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, we are witness. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together build up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Breakup and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring of the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah.
Thank you. Now that was a marriage. That was a marriage ceremony in ancient Hebrew times. Now if you notice a couple of things about this ceremony, he had the elders there. And there was no priest. As far as I can tell, there was no Levite. There was no descendant of Aaron at that ceremony. And those were the Israelite priests at that time. One other person that was missing there, if you noticed, there was no kissing of the bride or no introduction of Mr. and Mrs. Boaz because Ruth was not there. This was a property transaction conducted amongst the men.
But she had let it be known that she had gone to him in the field, I remember.
Right,
lying at
exactly,
his feet,
exactly.
but she let it be known before that happened, I think, that she was interested.
Oh, absolutely.
So give her
But she
a little-
wasn't at the marriage ceremony.
But she wanted all the settlement, so it wasn't.
Because essentially,
Give her some praise.
oh,
I will stay up for the woman.
Well, the mother-in-law put her up to it because I guess she knew that was the way they could survive.
oh yeah, Naomi
Yeah.
was the one who arranged all this.
Mhm.
She didn't have to do it if she didn't want to.
That's
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Well, there's a little bit of that Jewish thing of ancestry goes through the woman's line.
That I'm not clear about. Thou never was able to find a clear definition of that. The best I've been able to see is it went through the male line, from what I gather, because it was such a patriarchal society.
Yeah, but as I understand, you trace your Jewish ancestry through the female line.
Well, Matthew 1 is.
Yeah, I was just
through,
going to that.
From the house of David, and Jesus' ancestry is traced through the male line, is it not?
It is, but there's also one in here of Ruth and the father of Boaz, and the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and also the lady that saved the
Hagar,
the
Tamar.
whatever, no, oh, I can't think of her name. That saved the spies when Joshua sent the spies out. She's mentioned too.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that's intriguing to me about it is, we have this ancestry by name through the males,
Right.
and that's written in the scripture. But to preserve the heritage of her dead husband, Ruth needs to go with the property
She did.
to bear a line, a lineage, that will carry the name of the dead husband,
Right.
even though they have no genetic relationship to the dead husband, these offspring. And likewise, I understand that if you go to a synagogue and you tell the rabbi you're Jewish, you need to show it through your maternal line, not your paternal line. So they've got some interesting things going on here.
Oh, absolutely.
And I kind of wonder, did Ruth really have no power in the thing, or seems Jewish women have this way of exercising a tremendous amount of power indirectly.
Well, it was a kind of an indirect thing. If you read through the book of Ruth, and essentially her courtship of Boaz,
He got her attention before he noticed her when
he
she
noticed
was
her while she was gleaming in the
gleaming,
field.
yeah.
He noticed her, and well, she noticed him, and then he noticed her. And read the book of Ruth. You will find it enlightening how that transpires. As far as, and of course, in divorce is outlined. There was divorce, and it was outlined in Deuteronomy 24 verses 1 through 4. And essentially, a wife could not divorce a husband, but the husband could, and in cases did, divorce the wife. And there were any number of reasons he could divorce her. He could divorce her if he just didn't like her. She could also divorce her if she didn't bear him children, especially sons.
Who made up these rules?
This is what God told Moses,
Men,
according to the book, to the Bible. This is what God told Moses. This is, like I say, I want to put this into historical context here because
There was no feminist movement at that time, I guess.
not really.
No.
Let's go back to Sarah and Abraham.
Pardon?
Let's go back to Sarah and Abraham.
Go back to
Sarah
Sarah.
and Abraham. Sarah had control too, because God told Abraham to do what Sarah said. She wanted a child, and she presented her.
Yeah.
See?
She presented Hagar to Abraham.
And God
Hagar was an Egyptian And I'm gonna, and you
Sorry.
can read Genesis to tell how they came about having Hagar.
And then who was it went to see Rachel and they asked her permission to get married? Remember when,
That one I didn't,
Yeah.
that case I didn't study.
yeah, well, there's a case there where they asked her permission, so. There's
But-
certain places anyway where the women do have some say so.
But that's limited. It was the patriarch had the ultimate control over the household. But also, when Hagar became pregnant, Sarah got jealous.
So she,
And she essentially went to Abraham and said, hey, look, she can't stay here. And so, with Abraham's consent, she ran Hagar off. And
Well,
but
I
put-
think God revealed to Abraham to go ahead and do it because he
Yeah.
was going to make another great nation out of that.
That's right. And of course, the great nation that came out of the offspring of Hagar were today known as Arabs, the Arab nations. Now, as far as wife, the term wife is concerned in the Bible, in the Old Testament time, there was no clear definition of that, because if you recall earlier where I said that they could take captive women to be their wives, there was no bride price paid there, because essentially the husbands and the kinfolk had probably been killed off, the male kinfolk.
They were probably treated like the spoils of war.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
anything of value.
Exactly. I mean, essentially they became property. So that's how that was essentially dead. Essentially property. And then it just took a look at the word adultery. Now understand, there are terms in that particular time that had different meanings than what